what I'm going to do is just kind of read through this with you, and you can listen along. If you want to order it, you can order it, read along with me. But the question is, what is morality? Lesson 1. What is morality? And so I want to begin with this story. I was shocked the first time I saw a subway sign that said it was illegal to ride on the outside of the subway car. That option had never occurred to me. Okay, I can see why someone might ride between the cars, right? There's a train car and another train car, someone ride in between there. Maybe a car smells a little bit, or there's some annoying thing going on there, and so, okay, I'm going to risk riding in between the two. And that's illegal too, in between the cars. But this sign said it's wrong for someone to ride on the outside of the train car. That's just crazy. Or is it crazy? I started looking on the top of the door that was very much like a ledge, and then on the floorboard, right? And I could realize that my feet could probably stand on that metal ledge as well. And I could keep my balance by grabbing on the ledge at the top of the door. And then I started thinking, well, could someone fit on the outside as it sped along between the train and the wall? What I had never even considered suddenly became a temptation to me once I saw the command not to do it. And so I tried it. It wasn't very difficult. Wasn't very dangerous. It was a bit of a rush, actually. And at rush hour, who wants to sit in there with a bunch of people, stand with a bunch of people? Well, next paragraph here, I really didn't try it. Okay. But what did you think about me as I read that and said that I did? What did you think about me? Did you think it was wrong for me to attempt to ride on the outside of the subway car? You probably made some judgment calls about me and my character. Why did you think I was wrong? Why do you think that you can tell me what is right and wrong? Tim, you shouldn't do that. Maybe you thought that. And I would say, well, why? I'm not hurting anyone else. I'm minding my own business. I'm making things easier for me. Well, you might argue with me this way. A city has a right to make its own rules of what is best for those who live in it, or just passing through. I ought to obey the city laws. Or you might think of this way. It's a negative example for an adult, especially an adult who is a church leader, to ride on the outside of a subway train. And you'd be right there. You might argue also that it's not responsible behavior for someone who has such a large family, right? 5 kids, and they need income. And that's also true, right? I ought to be responsible. All of those are excellent reasons and more than enough to keep me from the ledge. But it illustrates an interesting human concept. Some actions are right and some actions are wrong. In this lesson, we're going to talk a little bit about that and answer the question, well, who can decide what is right and what is wrong? Who is able to tell me what I can do and what I can't do? All right, so before we get there, just kind of dive into another question. Is morality relative? Is morality relative? All right, you have relatives. Is one of them morality? Well, I think you understand that concept. Is morality completely relative, meaning entirely dependent on the circumstances? Nothing is really objective or fixed. It's completely fluid and moving. All these principles of right and wrong and morality. Okay, so morality is a word that often carries this concept of right and wrong, this internal ought. I'm going to say it's an ought. I ought to do this, an internal ought. Some would say morality is entirely relative. By relative, we mean that it is entirely flexible based on the circumstances involved. So, what is right for you today may not be so for you tomorrow, depending on the circumstances. I would say that most of us realize that can't work. It's hogwash. You could claim that morality is relative, and you may say that, but you don't believe it. This is an entirely secular way of looking at the world, and one that I don't want to experience for myself. It's dangerous, right? The person who says morality is entirely relative, there's nothing fixed, it's just based on circumstances, usually changes their mind, their tune, when you steal their wallet, or, let's see here. Or try to sell them land from New Zealand, right? And steal their identity and buy property in another country. All right, or you have a cup of boiling water, and you try to pour it on their head. Okay, all of a sudden it's wrong. It's wrong for me to sell you something. And I think we were realizing there that maybe like the idea of it being relative, but then when it comes down to it, we don't want it to be relative. Okay, there are certain things that should be fixed, and I'm getting ahead of myself here. I think I can flip back through the slides. Let me see if I could do it here. There we go. Okay, so there we are on the subway train. And there we are. Our lady who found the person who thinks that morality is relative. All right. If morality is relative, then where do we go from here? Right? Who wants to live in that world? And then if it's not relative, if it is fixed, then who is the person who can tell me what is right and wrong, and what is a standard for right and wrong? In his book, The Reason for God, Keller gives an entire chapter to developing this idea. A secular view of the world that purports relative morality as a bleak and even hopeless world is where he points to. And yet, understanding morality in the scope of Christian theology is a reasonable conclusion. Right, so I have this book, I think it's chapter 9, right, that focuses on this. Yeah, chapter 9. Okay, so let me read a couple paragraphs from that. If you believe human rights are a reality, then it makes much more sense that God exists than that he does not. If you insist on a secular view of the world, and yet you continue to pronounce some things right and some things wrong, then I hope you see the deep disharmony between the world and your intellect as divide the real world and God that your heart knows exists. This leads us to a crucial point. If a premise, there is no God, leads to a conclusion you don't know is true, if a premise, there is no God, leads to a conclusion you know isn't true, then why not change the premise? I agree wholeheartedly. The other option is to recognize that you do know where there is a God. You could accept the fact that you live as if beauty and love have meaning, as if there is a meaning in life, and if human beings have inherent dignity, all because you know God exists. It's dishonest to live as if he is there and yet fail to acknowledge the one who has given you all these gifts. All right, so he's saying there's, like, if you're acknowledging some sort of morality, some sort of standard, it's dishonest to try to have that, which is the only way life works, and not have the person who gave it to us. Okay, so let's pursue this a little bit more. Who made the standard of right and wrong? One of the most difficult words to hear in any language is no. All right, did you just say I couldn't do that? Well, you got another surprise coming to you, buddy. You can sense that in the subway story, right? As soon as you find out that you're not to do it, then there's something in you that says, well, I wonder why not. I want to do that. We have all have this in us. You don't like the word no. And maybe you're thinking in your mind, yes, I do. And that's probably because you don't like the word no. And so even in that, you'll push back. Some feel more threatened by others to the rule of no, simply because the authority structures that they've had in their life has mistreated them or harmed them, and so any other authority structure kind of reciprocates that in their mind, and they're uneasy about anyone and anything that would tell them no. Okay, so or maybe even just your personality resists, right? You're just by nature one of these folks that hates to be told no, right? All right, so we're all left saying, I don't want to obey authorities that I'm not required to obey, and I would agree. I don't want to obey the tax rules of Germany, right, and South Carolina and New Zealand. I'm living here in New York. I want to adhere the authority, the tax laws here, and not everywhere else. And that makes sense. So, who do we obey, right? Who do we obey? This is from my little niece here. You're actually, yeah, my niece. You're not my mommy and you're not the boss. She shouted those words emphatically several times to my wife. Sarah told her that she had to wash her hands, and she refused to obey. She had pretty good reasoning, right? She obeyed her mom, and her mom was the only authority that she would recognize. She didn't want anyone else to come between that authority structure. Sarah was Aunt Sarah, and not mommy. And to her, I think she was like 3-year-old mind, there was no reciprocity between mommies. So who should you obey? Who should we obey? Let's walk through that carefully for a few minutes. And let me state up front, of course, where we're headed in this thinking is that we'll end up with we should obey God. Okay, so one other thought before we get to that. Special oughts for special humans. I recently sat down and watched an amazing documentary with my kiddos, and I've done this a couple times into this similar Shark Week, whatever. Then it's Discovering the Ocean. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, right? Filled with mystery, many things that are still not discovered, and just out of this world type images. But the beauty is not unmixed with violence. As we gaze on the seals sliding around, I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was New Zealand again. I'm going to get back to New Zealand here. As we gazed at the seals sliding around the Arctic, along came this great white shark, and with suspenseful and remarkable skill, the video team documented a bloody attack. We watched the chase, the two that escaped, and then the slow motion catch in the air as the shark bit into the baby seal. The seal had no chance, and yet we watched it carefully, and the program was rated G. But then the worst part of it is the cover-up. Right? The camera crew allowed the great white to escape. I'm sure that the shark is still swimming around with blood-stained teeth, committing more murderous exploits. How can we, as a society, allow this to happen? With all the amazing programs we have today to help protect wildlife and ocean life, why in the world do we let the predator take the prey? Let me go even a little bit further here. I've been in another place, the zoo, and in that case, we're watching a similar thing, but the seals on the bloody end of this. I've watched seals swim around, clap, jump, in keeping with their trainer, and for reward, they're given a fish. That they're able to murder a smaller living animal to reward the seal. Right? How can this murder be documented in a documentary for kiddos and rewarded at the zoo? How is that possible? It may sound a little silly to you, but I would encourage you not to just relegate that to absurdity, but to really think about it. Why is it that animals can get away with these things, right? And if a monkey is throwing things at people at the zoo, it's funny. But then if you see it on the sidewalk, a human is throwing things at people, okay, we get the police involved, right? This is this is not good at all. Okay, so why this difference, right? We can't believe that we are just mammals and that only might is right, survival of the fittest. So then where did this sense of right and wrong come from? Right? Humans have an accepted standard of right and wrong. And these concepts point to a lawgiver, right? A law points to a lawgiver. And I would say this also points to the fact that there's a special set of laws for humans, a special set of rules for humans. And that's where we're headed with this whole study. Okay, so we go from the special oughts for humans to next big idea is the special architect of all these oughts. The special architect of all these oughts. Where do these oughts come from? And so we have these special sets of do's and don'ts, a sense of duty, a sense of guilt when disobeying that law, and all of that points to the existence of God. And the reasoning goes like this. This is where we're headed with the reasoning. Number one, humans are born with this innate sense of right and wrong. And I realize this isn't a syllogism, but it's just kind of some logical conclusions that come from one another that help us get to the pointing to who God is. Humans are born with an innate sense of right and wrong. Number two, this concept of right and wrong assumes a standard, a fixed standard of right and wrong. And then number three, a standard of right and wrong assumes a person who set that standard. So let's kind of clarify and talk through each one of those when we're done. Number one, humans are born with an innate sense of right and wrong. I don't know that you can disagree with me on that. I mean, we've kind of looked at it at a few different angles to this point. But someone might argue that this sense of right and wrong just comes from culture. And from, cultures vary completely from one side to another. And I would say that actually kind of adds to my argument here. All societies have found some behavior that is moral or ethical and some behavior that is not. And so there's a right and wrong in each of these cultures, and that's why you're saying that. And very often those cultural assessments of what is right and wrong just is so close and so parallel. So we do find that culture encourages this kind of decency. Right? You never find in a culture that in the nursery, the 3-4-year-olds or 2-year-olds, they're saying, Johnny is not stealing. He's sharing everything. We have got to teach him how to steal. No, generally speaking, you want the kiddos to be kind, and we teach them how to share. And of course, what's inside of is to break that law, right? And we don't have to teach them the other way. But no culture does that, is what I'm saying. Often cultures highlight not deception and distrust and abuse, but kindness. And so I want to look at a verse here that teaches what's going on here. This is from Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. It says, "For when the Gentiles who do not have the law do instinctively the things of the law, these, not having the law," and that's the law of Moses, "are a law to themselves, in that they show the law written on their hearts, their conscience bearing witness, and their thoughts alternately accusing or else defending them." So, in the surrounding verses, Paul is saying that all of us are guilty before God and need Jesus as Savior. And that's where we're headed with this whole study. But he doesn't get right to it. He helps us reason through this from the beginning. And that's what we're doing here in this class, realizing that Jewish people who have this Ten Commandments moral law, they know that they break it. But then he's saying the Gentiles too have this law, and as they do the things written in the law, they have this law written on their hearts. And so it's an interesting way to right, that the Holy Spirit, that God is telling us the way He made us. He made us with a sense of right and wrong, a sense of law that's written inside us. to where we know from the beginning of days, just as we're learning how to walk and talk, we feel bad about doing wrong. So that's what he's talking about. Let's just kind of get into the details there. He says that the law is written on their hearts. So you have this law written in your hearts. And then you have a conscience. So there's the law in your heart. And then there's a conscience that you're made that actually speaks the law to you. And so you have a law that's printed there. And then the conscience is kind of like this prosecuting attorney that comes along and says, you're wrong. Look at this. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're guilty. And we feel guilt. What else does it have? It says their conscience bearing witness, and then their thoughts either accusing or defending them. And so these thoughts are the judge and jury, and the defense attorney. And so you have your thoughts that are the defense attorney that reads the law and says, no, you're okay with doing that, and tries to get you off the hook, right? So you have this candy bar, and you want to take it from the store, and no one's there, and your heart tells you, no, that's wrong to take something that's not yours. And your conscience, right, speaks that to you. Tim, don't take that. But then you have these thoughts. These thoughts are going to tell you, yeah, but this store has all this money. It doesn't need it. Go ahead, have it for yourself. Or it accuses you and says you took it, that was wrong, and that guilt comes. And so this is all inbuilt into us. That God placed it there. He made us that way. And so you have the inner law, conscience, and then thoughts that accuse or defend. That's what's going on. That is the Bible's explanation for this concept of morality in our heart. Okay, so get back to this logical progression here. Secondly, the concept of right and wrong assumes a standard of right and wrong. The concept, right? So humans are born with a sense of right and wrong, and we're saying that was written on their hearts. The Bible says that. And then this concept of right and wrong assumes a standard above all of these standards that is right and wrong. Okay, so let's get to that here. And right, if we can agree that there's a standard of right and wrong that is inside most humans, right? There may be some psychopaths that feel no sense of guilt their whole life and no sense of right and wrong. Maybe that's true. But I would think that they did toward the beginning, but what the Bible says, they seared that conscience. That conscience kept talking to them, and they kept putting it down, and then eventually they didn't hear it anymore. They seared it and turned the volume off. Okay, so if we can all agree that there's a standard of right and wrong inside most humans, then it's not much of a jump. Okay, so I'm just getting a little jump at a time here. To get to the idea that there's an overarching standard of right and wrong that supersedes every culture. And so let's just deal with this idea. Well, no, it's only a cultural construct. C.S. Lewis argues this really well. This is from Mere Christianity, and if you're familiar with this book, actually, he is writing this during World War II, and they're asking him to give these radio addresses to people in Europe, because specifically England, because people are struggling with life and death, and they're getting bombed every day, and so the darkness of evil is right on their right. They're experiencing the darkness of evil every day, and they're wrestling with that, and they want to know God. And so he actually uses these lectures to show who God is. And so I highly recommend it to you, Mere Christianity. The first section, so this would be the first 5 chapters. Book 1 has to do with this topic that we're dealing with today. Let me read the Book 1, Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. Right and wrong as a clue to the meaning of the universe. And so he's showing this morality as this clue, this sense that there is a God. You read a couple paragraphs from this of why morality is not just a cultural construct. First reason, though there are differences between the moral ideas of one time or country and those of another, the differences are not very great, not nearly so great as people imagine, and you can recognize the same law running through them all, whereas mere conventions, like the rule of the road or the kind of clothes people wear, may differ to any extent. Okay, so these principles of morality, and he does this in an appendix in a different book. I can't remember what book it is, but he kind of highlights many different ancient cultures and contemporary cultures and the similarities between the two. And even at that time, right, those who were doing the worst of the atrocities in World War II, they knew that they were wrong. Right? And so their culture was saying something different, but they knew in their heart that what their culture was telling them was wrong. Okay, the other reason is this. When you think about these differences between the morality of one people and another, do you think that the morality of one people is ever better or worse than that of the other? Have any of the changes been improvements? If not, then of course there could never be any moral progress. Progress means not just changing, but changing for the better. All right, if no set of moral ideas were truer or better than the other, there would be no sense in preferring civilized morality to savage morality or Christian morality to Nazi morality. And so you see what he's working through there, right? Just you're acknowledging that there are different cultural norms means that one cultural norm is better than the other. And of course we would acknowledge that when it comes to what he's dealing with there, the culture of Germany at that time, and that actually arose from a Darwinian view of people and morality. So some cultural laws are more acceptable than the others. These laws are more in tune with the highest law. The view of a higher law, a higher standard, if you believe in a higher standard that supersedes all cultures, then you see how this naturally leads the view that a person is behind this highest standard. And so that's where our final thought is here. There is a person behind all of this, and that's where we get to God. He is the one. Right? There are rules for right and wrong that transcend all societies, but are only shared by humans. So there's this higher law, and that higher law points to a higher lawgiver. Right? Is there someone who supersedes all cultures, right? Whose existence supersedes all time, transcends all time and cultures? Well, the answer is he is God. His culture transcends all cultures. His existence transcends time. So he is able to do this. And so that's the conclusion the Bible has come to, and the conclusion that I come to. But I would say this: what conclusion have you come to? Right, because if you don't believe this, right, Keller brings out a good point that and he's, as he's talked with secular folks about this, thinkers, it's not a good end. If you get God out of the picture, there's not a good answer to this. C.S. Lewis has helped us with this idea that it's not just cultural. I think we've realized that it's not just evolutionary or naturalistic. That's a horrible conclusion. And so, what are you left with? And I would say that the biblical view, right, that there is a creator God who made us with this internal ought, to long for him and to be right with him, so that we would ask him for this rightness of relationship, is the reasonable answer, and that this God would speak to us and reveal his plan to us is reasonable. And the Bible is that reasonable answer, and it does teach us how to be rightly related to him through Jesus. and that Jesus did take all our law breaking upon himself to make our path to God. And so that's where we'll go in the weeks to come. But today we're just getting that one tiny step, okay? And we're kind of out of time here, so I need to move on. But the last idea by this, maybe I'll conclude with this. Why the rules, right? Why would God give us these rules? And so, right, it's to point us to wanting Him in this relationship. But also, I'd like to share this, that they're given for our benefit. They show how a society works well, works best. Right, a manufacturer usually leaves a list of instructions on how to properly use a device. Right? Don't wash this in the dishwasher. Don't bake this in the oven. Don't throw this down the stairs. Right? On and on the list goes. And so you look in the pot or the whatever, and you say, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. I can't do this, I can't do that. There's all these lists of things I can't do. Do they just not want me to have any fun? That's not what the manufacturer's doing. It's telling you how to best use the device. It's saying this is the way we made this so that this works best doing this way. And that's why God's morals, they're not just random things that keep us from joy. They show us how to enjoy Him and to really enjoy the life that He's given, right? They're the fence around the house that makes the yard safe, that gives us the joy of playing in a safe yard and staying out of the street, as it were. So I would encourage you to not resist them, but embrace them, and then to continue on these lessons as we think deeply into each one, realizing that we have broken them, these laws, and we need to have someone to mend this fence, this relationship. All right, so please tune in next time as we look at the next lesson and jump right into a few of the 10 Commandments together.